Hello everyone, it's me, your host, Rich Hagon, for this Talking Points, or Talking Points, because this is a show all about the world of pro magic. It's also a show in which I talk a lot, ideally with a voice, and as you can tell, I don't have a lot of voice, so this is going to be a fun one. But then, of course, when you don't have a lot of voice, you do have the super sexy Rich Hagon voice. So anyway, welcome along. Thanks for being here, and thanks to my good friends at Hipsters of the Coast for making this all possible, because it is down to them. My mouth, their brains. That's how it works. So we're going to split this show up into a number of segments, like an orange, about which I got teased mercilessly on the Pro Tour, though only backstage people know that, so I'll tell you about that later on. But anyway, in the show today, what have we got? I'm going to tell you about Albuquerque. It's a place in America. I'll tell you a few more things as well. I'm going to tell you about American Airlines. I'm going to tell you about Marcio Carvalho and Javier Dominguez. Then I'm going to tell you about the Pro Tour. I'm going to talk to you about draft. I'm going to talk to you about Yuki Matsumoto and the first draft and how we pick drafts for the Pro Tour. And then I'm going to talk about standard. That'll be fun. And talk about lots of different decks that are in standard. And when I've done all that, we'll work through what happened by the end of day one. And then we'll talk about draft again on day two. And then we'll talk about the end of the Swiss. Then we'll talk about the top 8. After that, we'll go through all 37 teams in the team series. And after we've done that, we'll talk a little bit about disqualifications and cheating. Gosh, that'll be fun. And then we'll rattle through the top 25. Then we'll talk about GP Warsaw, Atlanta and Shanghai. And by the way, if you're wondering, is this my home? No, this is my airport hotel on the way to Warsaw, because that's right, I left Albuquerque on Monday, got home on Tuesday, and here I am at another airport going to Warsaw on Wednesday, because I have no life. We all understand this. And at the end of the show, you will hear a rubbish joke. You will always hear a rubbish joke. They'll be dotted throughout the show liberally, I think it's fair to say. But at the end, you will get one cataclysmically terrible rubbish joke, which I will warn you about before it starts, so you know when to stop the recording to preserve your sanity. So all of that is coming your way on episode 1 of Talking Points, or Talking Points, depending on how you view things. So, Albuquerque. There was a Pro Tour in Albuquerque last week. I didn't know much about it, and I've got to be honest, I tend not to bother finding out about the places that I'm going to, because in general, what I find is the more places you go to with expectations, the more disappointing they are. And when you go with no expectations at all, you suddenly find you're in a wonderful city that you can't wait to take your wife and your children and people you kidnap to. And none of that was Albuquerque. Turns out it's in a desert. I actually did know that bit before I went, and I thought that just meant it'd be quite warm. Well, it was quite warm, but there was more to it than that, because what I discovered was that actually it is not a healthy place at all. Everyone, all the players, all the people backstage were just really struggling with bits of coughs and colds and flu and horrible dehydration. It was not a fantastic city to be in. Now, on the plus side, one thing that Albuquerque does have is space. When you go to Tokyo, for example, you go to a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour in Japan, if you put the suitcase in the room, either it gets the bed or you do. And one of you gets the bath for the night, is basically how it works. Rooms are not large in Japan. Albuquerque, however, had some space. The clue was in the words Embassy Suites, which was great because it meant you had TVs in both rooms, you had a kitchen area, you had a great big couch to splurge out on. I loved the room. But that's not reason enough to go back. So my hunch is, unless there's another Grand Prix or a Pro Tour in Albuquerque, you will not be hearing me report on episode 58 of Talking Points, or Talking Points, from Albuquerque. Ho-hum. Now, how I got there is via a thing called an aircraft. And I work with the fine people at American Airlines and have for the last decade or so. I discovered this weekend that apparently you can use points to send other people on flights. Christian Calcano explained this to me on Monday this week, which means that apparently with my 800,000 miles, I should be buying people flights all the time. So if you're in America and you want flights bought for you, you should probably talk to me. End of commercial. Now I'm going to explain why you should never fly with American Airlines. So I get on the plane, Manchester to Chicago, and I'm minding my own business. And I always love it when you meet people unexpectedly. Right? I think there's just, particularly when it's not just unexpected that you meet them, but it's where you meet them that's unexpected. Case in point, Worlds 2006 were in Paris, and my diet basically comprises cheese, ham, and bread. And where can I find all these things? Well, the answer is in the French superstore mega supermarket Carrefour, which is 5 minutes walk from the staff hotel. So I go there and I'm minding my own business, and I come round the corner, past the frozen meat aisle, and there's the entire Brazilian Worlds team, including Paulo Vitor da Rosa, who in fact would go on to make the top 8 of that Pro Tour. And, well, first of all, what are they doing there? Because there's no freezer. Were they just going to have it thaw out in their room and then eat it raw later in the week? I don't know. Maybe it was some sacrificial rite or something. And it worked because Paolo made the top 8. But I love just bumping into people like that. So I'm on the plane in Manchester, minding my own business, and people start piling on. And I see this bald head guy. I think, oh, that's weird. You look a bit like Alessandro Lippi from Italy. And then there's a guy behind him, and I think, now that is weird, because you look like Marco Camilleri, who is the only player that I'm aware of who has 2 copies of 4 letters in his name, double M, double I, double L, double Z, Marco Camilleri. Huh. How strange to find 2 people who look like Magic players, one after the other. And then I went, and you look like Marcio Carvalho, and you look like Javier Dominguez. That's how many people it took me to work out the following facts. 1. Manchester is in England. 2. Liverpool is in England. 3. Liverpool is about 15 miles from Manchester. 4. Grand Prix Liverpool had finished less than 24 hours earlier. That's right, my friends. I was completely oblivious to the Grand Prix in my own country. That's why I'm making this show, because I've got my finger on the pulse of all things Magic the Gathering in the pro world. Oh dear. So, it was, of course, Alessandro Lippi and Marco Camilleri and Patrick Dickman. And yes, it was Javier Dominguez. And yes, it was Marcio Carvalho. And I can tell you, oh, excuse me. Well, that was a bit unexpected. Excuse the interruption. That turned out to be my taxi for the morning, them letting me know that, yes, they have booked it. That was very thoughtful of them, and also completely destroyed the flow of the opening of this sequence. But there we are. There it is. So we're on the plane. Marvellous. Now, Marcio and Javier, that's where we got to when we were so rudely interrupted. Marcio Carvalho got quite cross. That's a British word that's sort of a polite version of angry with Javier Dominguez during the World Championship final, because Javier, well, he lost the final. I think we all remember that, to William Jensen. But it was the manner that he lost that got Marcio so irritated. Apparently, and that's a euphemism that sort of encompasses the phrase, according to people who know about how to play professional Magic at a very high level, which I listen to, close brackets. Apparently, Javier could have won Game 4 of the World Championship final, and didn't, because he was foolish. Indeed, he was a very naughty boy, as someone once said. So Marcio was not best impressed with his teammate and friend Javier, and gave him a proper bollocking. That's another English word, which means he was not happy with him. So they have this little contretemps, that's French, over Game 4. And the general consensus about Marcio was that Marcio was being this is a technical term, a dick. And that was kind of the way most people saw it. Now, a lot of people don't like Marcio, and arguably there are some very good reasons for that to do with cheating in the past. But I had to think about this and thought his reaction seemed much stronger than it needed to be. And of course, that would be one explanation, because he's just not a very good person. But I don't think it was that. You see, the connection I make is that Marcio finished second at Worlds last year to BBD. And here he is having absolutely gone to town with the team. And here's his friend, Javier Dominguez. He can't influence the outcome in any way. He just has to sit there and watch his friend try to beat William Jensen, which basically no one had done all weekend. And then there is this adrenaline dump of, oh my God, second again. Because although it wasn't him finishing second, it was his team, it was his buddy, it was his friend, it was his testing companion. So, just as a by the by, on this occasion, I'm very inclined to give Marcio a pass on this. I do not think it was remotely as inappropriate or non-comprehensible. That's not a word. Incomprehensible. Ding! Well done, me. As it might have been. So, Marcio and Javier, they were getting on famously again on the plane from Manchester to Chicago. Now, a public service announcement. Don't ever fly from Manchester to Chicago with American Airlines. 10 years ago, when I started, they laughingly called it the flagship service. Flagship it was not. Ship, just about. It is still, it's about the only route left on American that still flies planes from the 1970s. You're thinking, I don't actually mean that, do I? Yes, I do. Main screen TV, 20 rows in the distance. Seats that don't shift, no armrests that move. The Italians, who were flying obviously straight from Liverpool with me to Albuquerque, were like, what are we doing on here? Any other airline, Air Iran, Air Iraq, Air Moscow, they'd all have been great by comparison. So when I offered earlier to buy flights for you on American, make sure it isn't Manchester to Chicago. So we get to Albuquerque, which I've already talked about. Everyone dies in Albuquerque. We just got out in time. So we get to the Pro Tour and we kick off with draft. A lot of people ask, how do we decide who we're going to show? And this is very complicated, but comes down to the word we decide quickly. We get the pairings only a few minutes before we go live at 9 o'clock, and obviously over 400 players. That means there are 50 draft tables plus, and we have to try and evaluate where the good ones are. So, obviously the field is spread out. You've got your 20-some Hall of Famers, your 20-some Platinums, your 80-some Gold. So that's a quarter of the field. Then you've got another quarter of the field that's your kind of your Silvers and your Grand Prix winners. And then you've got about half the field that are RPTQers and Magic Online qualifiers and so on. Trying to work out what the best pod is super hard. And again, you do it very, very fast. What we ended up with was this. Ken Yukihiro from Team Masashi, Yuki Matsumoto, more about him in a minute, Anton Jonsson, Hall of Famer, who, if there'd been a show of Talking Points last week, we'd have talked all about, because Anton Jonsson, Hall of Famer, made the top 8 of GP Phoenix last week. Alex Stock of the Netherlands, Jeremy Dizani, Pro Tour champion from Connected Company, Yuki Ichikawa from Team Masashi, so 2 Masashi in there, Genesis, represented by Brad Nelson, and Zach West, who was an RPTQer. Now, a word about Zach West, who went 1 and 2, by the way, which is exactly 1 win more than expectation. In my role as host at the news desk, I am often a tad dismissive of the RPTQer at the table, because there's usually only 1. There might be 2. On this occasion, Alex Stock, who is no mug, by the way, would be the 7th player in that table in terms of, ranking your expectations of them. And so people say, oh, you're very unkind to those first-timers, the RPTQers, the people who, aren't the big names at the table. So there's 2 things there. First of all, I'm not being unkind. I'm trying to be realistic. If you are up against, let's say his 3 matches are at 0-0, former player of the year Brad Nelson, at 0-1, Hall of Famer Anton Jonsson, and at 0-2, Jeremy Dizani. Pick the names at random pretty much from that table. His win expectation is very, very low. It's less than 1. He is clearly the underdog in all 3 of those matches. And that's not just true of Zach West. That's true of any RPTQer basically ever. First-timer coming in kind of thing. So it's partly about trying to manage expectations. But it's also giving you someone to root for. Because if I just say, here's 3-time top 8 Ken Yukihiro, here's Anton Johnson, Hall of Fame, here's Pro Tour champion, blah, 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 and someone called Zach West, doesn't mean anything unless you know him personally. But if I say to you, here's someone at their first Pro Tour, they haven't had a match win yet, and now to get there, they have to beat a Pro Tour champion, they have to beat multiple Hall of Famers, they have to beat 3 of the team players that were in the Team Series final. And now we have a narrative around Zach West. And if he gets to 2-0 and plays for the pod against one of these great players, most of us are rooting for him. So I have great respect for anyone who qualifies for the Pro Tour because it's super hard. But I do also understand that if you are the player who is not the known player with 7 known players or 6 known players in Pod 1, your win percentage is going to be very, very low. 1 and 2, perfectly acceptable. Whoever he beat, great job. Now, Yuki Matsumoto, let's talk about that plan and how that came together. So it's in the nature of stats that if you have 100 numbers along a line, most of them are clustered in the middle, and the ones you're most interested in are the low ones and the high ones, not the ones in the middle, unless you just want to know what average looks like. So as a simple example, we see how old everyone is at the Pro Tour. We don't particularly care that there are 100 players in their 20s or 150 players in their 30s or whatever it is. It's more than that, actually. We're interested in the 12 teenagers, and we're interested in the 1 15-year-old, and we're interested in Toru Inoue of Japan, who is generally often the oldest player at the Pro Tour because he's 55. And so it's at the ends of things that you care, and you just make the stats for everyone so you can find out where that high end is. So Yuki Matsumoto is someone who we found when we were going through the stats as having a frankly absurdly high draft win percentage. We called him on air Mr. 76%. Now 76% is, by most measures, unsustainable. You cannot do that long term. Think of the best players in the world. We say as a rule of thumb in any given format, 2 out of 3, 66%, is legendary status. Okay, that is best of the best of the best of all time over a long period. So, Paulo Vida Dama Rosa might be 61, Luis Scott Vargas might be 64, Seth Manfield 66, Marcio Carvalho 68. Getting to 70 is basically next to impossible. So 76 is stratospherically off the charts. Indeed, eye-rollingly so. And when I say that, that's a euphemism for pros who heard that went, yeah, that's not real. That can't be true. Which, again, just to spell it out, means that people who hear that think, he's probably cheating. Well, we did our due diligence. We went and talked to the huge Japanese coverage team and said, out of interest, no agenda, Yuki Matsumoto, tell us about him. And, of course, it's hard because not many of them speak English and none of us speak fluent Japanese. But we did get some good answers, including the one delightfully memorable one, which was draft, yes. Personality, no. They then went on to say, nice guy, but draft, yes, yes, yes. Okay, so fair enough. They certainly don't think there's a whiff of not quite right about him, which is good because we proceeded to show him on day 1 of the Pro Tour. And he rewarded us thoroughly because not only did he create some controversy by picking a blight keeper over a contract killing, which apparently is a very bad thing to do by most measures, he then proceeded to go 1-0 and 2-0 and indeed 3-0. A lot of people on social media said, why didn't you show him in round 3? I've got a really easy answer for you. Mistake. We looked at the pairings. He's not a famous name, remember. Yes, he's won an individual Grand Prix. Yes, he's won a team Grand Prix. But he is not in the top 10 Japanese names. Certainly that puts him in the top 100 or so in the field. And yes, Ken Yukihiro is a decent player. Of course he is. They played for the pod, I think. But it just wasn't one of the flagship matches. And we hadn't the team looking over the pairings, because we're at the news desk getting ready for the match. People in the booth are getting ready for the match. So it's backstage. Someone's looking at the pairings and going, what are the feature matches this round? And it just got missed. So several people reached out to me and said, we were truly baffled. Baffled, I tell you, that you didn't have him in round 3. Well, we would have done if we'd had a few extra minutes just to have a look. And that is almost always the answer to why wasn't match X in the feature match area. We just didn't spot it in time. And you might think, well, it's only 5 minutes. Why don't they just hold the tournament a bit? Well, yeah. If you do that for the draft and 8 rounds, you add an hour or so to the day. Pardon me. So that's why we don't. So in any case, Yuki Matsumoto goes 3-0. Great job. Fantastic stuff. And at the end of draft on day 1, one of the big stories was Team Channel Fireball, because it turned out that they'd gone 16-2 in 3 rounds of draft, which is, well, that's unsustainable too. Just completely crazy. So that was just off the charts silly. 4 3-0s, 2 2-1s. One of the best teams, not just ever assembled, because obviously it's only season 2 of the team series. One of the best groups of 6 players ever put into a room. Nuts. So that was draft, which means that next up we'll talk a bit about standard. So, to the world of standard. Now, let's remember that the Pro Tour was in a pretty weird spot this time around in terms of the calendar. This wasn't your usual, here's a pre-release, here's a week off for good behaviour, here's the Grand Prix that are limited the weekend before the Pro Tour, here's the Pro Tour. That was all completely changed for Ixalan as an experiment. And I think there were a lot of nerves, quite frankly, on the part of both Wizards and team coverage, because where is that voyage of discovery? Where is that sense of shiny and newness going to come from? We had that in abundance at the World Championship. Draft was the exploration. Draft was where we found the Christian Calcano, Blightkeeper and Swashbuckling and Mark of the Vampire and so on. That deck was already just known and part of the furniture here at Pro Tour Ixalan. So the question became, what was going to happen with standard? We'd already seen Team Energy do the business at Worlds. So our hunch coming in was that Team Energy was going to be right up there amongst the best decks, and some people were going to iterate on it and some people were going to try and beat it. Well, day 1, we got a proper standard of 2 halves. It was a tale of 2 standards. There was almost literally half the field, 48.2%, were energy. Now, there were some different energies. There was Teamer energy. There was Sultai energy, such as Seth Manfield played, so Winding Constrictors and Rishkar, Pima, Renegade, and all that kind of stuff. There were the 4-colour energy decks with Scarab God, obviously. And then there were other flavours as well. We had Mark Tobias do a deck tech on day 1 on a sort of riddle form version with Crash Through, a sort of aggressive, tiny teamer, he called it, along with Steve Hatto. And altogether, and then also there was Piotr Legowski was doing things like Sky Sovereign, console flagship, and people were taking Glorybringers out. And, so it wasn't as straightforward as, it's all Teamer energy, it's all the same, it's Jensen's list from the World Championship. But, no lie, half the field turned up with an energy deck. Now, a fantastic lesson on social media. One of the things I genuinely feel, if you want to get better at Magic, this is not really a show about teaching you to be better at Magic week by week, but I'm sure we can do some of that along the way. I strongly recommend following as many pros as you can on social media, because amongst all the joking and the teasing and the daggering, you will find out some really fundamental truths about the game of Magic. So, for example, someone who, not quite sure who it was now, but Who doesn't matter? The important thing is this. They came away, they had a great time at the Pro Tour, even though I didn't do very well, had a decent record in draft, got to constructed, played Teamer, and played Energy Mirrors in 9 of the 10 constructed rounds, and went 2-7 in those 9 rounds. Some of that was down to luck. Some of that was me drawing badly, some of that was my opponent drawing well. Lots of it was my opponent being better at the deck than I was. On balance, I should have played Ramanat Bread, which I'd played before at a couple of tournaments and had some sense of what to do with. And I was just outplayed with Teamer. Now, as I say, I do think I know who that was, but it doesn't matter who it was. What matters is this. That player understood 3 days too late that the best deck was not the best deck for them. And the reason it wasn't the best deck for them is that other people were going to play it better. Now, if you're someone like me, you understand that almost any deck you choose, people are going to play better. But there are some decks you just shouldn't be touching. And there are some decks that give you the best chance of winning. And figuring that out is part of learning what to do at your first Pro Tour, well above and beyond a simple, what's the best deck? Because, again, let's just go to the simplest version of this. Would you fancy your chances in a 75 card best 3 out of 5 Teamer Energy Mirror against William Jensen? I'm going to assume the answer to that, unless it's Reed or Owen I'm talking to right now, is no, not really, I wouldn't. If you wanted to beat William Jensen and you knew he was on Teamer Energy, you'd choose something else. You'd choose a deck that might have a favourable matchup against him. You'd choose a deck where you had the fewest number of possible turns before he would demonstrate how much better than you he was at Magic. So I think that at a lot of Pro Tours, a lot of inexperienced players choose a good deck for a terrible reason and get punished for it. And they choose it because they go, it's the best deck. And they don't finish the sentence, to give me a chance at this Pro Tour. Because the best deck, especially if it's well known, is going to lead to a lot of mirrors. And you're not going to be good enough to win a lot of those mirrors. Now, if what you want to do when you come to your first Pro Tour is, and I mean this in the most loving way possible, pretend to be a pro for the weekend. So you want to do everything right the way, and that's certainly what I did at my 2 Pro Tours. I wanted to feel like a professional, to prepare thoroughly, to only play the best cards, and so on. That's fine, because then you're saying, I'm prepared to lose in a Teamer Mirror because I want to feel that I tested myself against the best. And if it turns out that Yuki Ichikawa's better than me, and William Jensen's better than me, and this guy from Venezuela I've just met is better than me, well, okay. But I went and I played the best deck. I didn't play some home brew. It just depends how badly you want to give yourself that sliver of a chance to win. So, on the one side, the 50% that was Teamer. On the other side, the 50% that were, I'm not playing Teamer, pox on both your houses, I don't want to go near Energy. And the bulk of people who thought, I found a way to beat Teamer. And as we said on the broadcast, there's basically, day 2 gives you an answer. Some of them are wrong, nearly all of them are wrong, or they're all wrong about thinking they're going to beat the Energy decks in general. And most of the time, it's most that are wrong. And sometimes it's all of them. So, what did we have? So, as we'll see in the top 8, we had a bunch of different flavours of Energy. But what about the not Energy lists? Turns out there was a ton of really cool stuff around. So, Elliot Busso, you may have seen Raf Levy has already posted an article about this deck. Raf wasn't at the Pro Tour because he had the birth of his first son. Congratulations, Raf and Monica. More on that in the Team Series chat. But Elliot Busso from Team Magic Corsairs crew, more of that in the Team Series chat, went 8-2 with a white-blue cycling deck with Drakehaven. Oh yes, Drake Haven. Wilson Hunter turned up with Mono White Vampires. Now, I can't be alone, can I, in liking the fact that he is Wilson Vampire Hunter. I mean, it was good enough for Abraham Lincoln. He got a movie made out of it, for goodness sake. So I think Wilson Vampire Hunter seems perfectly reasonable. He played Mono White Vampires, a Danto Vanguard, just attacking left, right, and centre. I loved the deck. Sorry he didn't do better in the end, but great to see it on camera and great to do a deck tech, which Phil Braverman came to do. And he's part of a legacy podcast, which I think it's not Brainstorm Brewery, it's just the Brainstorm legacy podcast. So, White Blue Cycling, Mono White Vampires. What else did we see? Well, Patrick Dickman, who'd actually been pretty ill through the first part of the week, Albuquerque, did I mention, playing Green Blue Electrostatic Pummeler. And Pummeler's a deck that people really hate losing to. Have you noticed that? People don't just say, oh yeah, I lost to Pummeler deck. People say, I lost to Teema. Yeah, Grixis Control, lost to that. I don't believe it. I lost to an electrostatic pummeler deck. Who does that? He killed me from 58 in one attack. Whatever, right? I mean, it's just a deck. Calm down. But that was there. Then Andre Prost, and I think Stephen Neal played this as well, from the Hot Sauce gang, Mono Black Aggro. With Bontu's Last Reckoning, which I believe is a non-bow. Now, I asked Paul Cheon at the desk what a wombo combo was. So maybe this sort of Bontu's Last Reckoning with an aggro deck is a non-bow wombo combo. I'm going to ask him about that at the next Pro Tour. Yes, I am, Paul. You've been warned. So there was the Mono Black aggro deck. Someone like Wendell Santini played White Blue Approach. Now, incidentally, all these decks I'm talking to you about are available on the Magic the Gathering website, so you can check those out. White Blue Approach, not a surprise. Shaheen Surani was playing Grixis Control, also not a surprise. But my God, that is a proper hardcore control deck. All the sensors in the world. Good man. I'm a big fan of Shaheen. He is the current patron saint of control, while Guillaume Wafatapa is not around. Although actually Guillaume was on site at this one. Eduardo dos Santos Vieira of Brazil had green-white aggro. It was nice to see that making an appearance. He was in the feature match area towards the back end of day 2. Travis Wu was one of the black-blue God Pharaoh's gift players. And then as you go a little bit further down the standings, still plenty more variety in standard. Lorenzo Polona playing Abzan tokens. Pascal Viren with the white-black tokens. He was part of the Pascal on Pascal matchup, which was him, Pascal Viren, against Pascal Minard, which at the time, halfway through day 1, we thought was just a sort of bit of a palate cleanser. Here's a bit of weirdness going on. Great, God Pharaoh's gift, white-black tokens, lots of life gain. Fantastic. And of course, it was a preview of Pascal Minard going all the way to the final. Then you had Kazuki Yada, who was playing black-red aggro, and that's actually the third time he's played that, or as I call it, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, then Torsten Anders was a blue-black control mage. Aaron Barrich had Teema Pummeler. Again, Electrostatic Pummeler. Oh no, the sky's falling. I lost to a Pummeler deck. And Kazuyuki Takamura, former Pro Tour champion, had Esper GPG. So, God Pharaoh's gift. I always think that's going to be Prince and the NPG. My name is Prince, and I am funky. My name is Prince, the one and only. I did not come to funk around and all that. But no, apparently it's GPG, which is different. But I got to do a Prince reference, which was nice. So that was the shape of standard. And that brought us to the end of day 1. And at the end of day 1, 2 first-timers, good on them, Brad Maxwell and someone called Samuel Ehlenfelt, not to be confused with Sam Eilenfelt, which is what we eventually found out he liked to be called, were at 7 and 1. And then Ryan Shoemaker, Alberto Galicia, and Luciano Nagakawa of Japan were at 6 and 2. So that's 5 first-timers in their very first Pro Tour, 7 and 1 and 6 and 2. Outstanding record. The Hall of Famers, there were 19 of them, 15 of them made it into day 2. Of the Platinums, there were 28, 23 made it into day 2. And of the gold, 76, well, conveniently, 19 missed out on day 2. That's 25% exactly, which is a nice convenient round number. As far as the team series went, well, CFB, obviously you can't do 16 and 2 every 3 rounds, so they had come back to the field a tiny bit. But really, day 1 is all about getting people through to day 2 and being in shape for a run at the top 8. Now, our measure for this, as far as the team series goes, is to say if you've got 3 losses or less, so 5 and 3 or better, you're in shape for the top 8, potentially, because then 7-0, 7-1, somewhere around there, gives you a chance. At 4 and 4, you're very unlikely to make it in, because even though on this occasion 1, 12 and 4 did make it in, lots did not. And at 4 and 4, you've got very little chance. So we measure who's into day 2 and how many have a chance at the top 8. So at the top end of that, you've got Channel Fireball with 6 people through and 5 people in contention. You've got Genesis with 6 people through, but only 2 actually in contention. There were a whole bunch of 4-4s sitting there at the back end of day 1. And then at the very bottom end, you've got teams like Cloud Post Crew, 2 players through, 1 in contention. Snap Cardster, 2 through, 1 in contention. So we got to the end of day 1. We had 2 perfect records, of course we did. Jan Wing Chun had gone the distance, and so had Piotr Glagowski of Poland, which is where Warsaw is this weekend. That's quite convenient. So that was the Shaper Standard. That brings us to the end of day 1. And in the next part of the show, we'll talk about day 2 and the top 8 of the Pro Tour.